"Sir, I said sit down, now!" The command cracked like a whip across the emergency room. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The fluorescent lights above flickered in rhythm with the tension. Franklin Dawes froze, one hand gripping his chest, the other bracing against the intake desk. 81 years old. Marine Corps cap perched gently on his head, its edges worn soft with time. His lips parted, but no words came. Just the sound of his shallow breath and the soft rasp of rubber soles shifting on tile. Behind the desk, Nurse Rebecca Connors didn't bother making eye contact. Her voice cut cold through the white noise of coughs and distant beeping monitors. "You're not bleeding. You're not dying. Sit down and wait like everyone else." Franklin blinked, disoriented, then turned away. He took a slow step toward the seating area, then another. His right knee buckled slightly, and he caught himself against the wall, trying not to fall. A young mother glanced at him from behind a stroller. Her child watched, wide-eyed. "Is he okay, Mom?" She said nothing. Franklin lowered himself into a hard plastic chair, one hand still pressed to his chest. The Marine Corps emblem stitched on his cap glinted briefly in the sterile light. His shoulders sank, not from age, but from something heavier. And still, no one moved. Not the receptionist. Not the guard leaning near the vending machine. Not the man behind the curtain who'd been moaning for 10 minutes. But just beyond the automatic doors, 4 men had just stepped into the building. They moved with quiet discipline. Casual clothes, clean-shaven, eyes alert. The tallest of them, Staff Sergeant James Halpern, stopped mid-stride. His gaze locked on the man in the chair, on the slumped shoulders, on the patch. He didn't speak, not yet. But something shifted. The air changed. And the silence was about to end. If you believe every veteran deserves dignity, subscribe now. Every view helps this message reach the people who need it most. The sun crept slowly over Temecula's low hills, casting long lines of golden light across the mobile home park just off State Route 79. The desert air was cool but dry, and the wind chimes on Franklin Dawes' porch played a hollow tune, the kind only heard when no one else is awake. Inside, the morning was quiet. Franklin stood at his kitchenette counter, pouring water into an old kettle. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, each gesture measured like a ritual he'd practiced 1,000 times. The counter was clean, lined with a faded, checkered cloth. A ceramic mug waited beside a single spoon. Everything had its place. He looked to his right, where a small photo sat in a carved wooden frame. A woman, smiling. Dark hair pulled back, eyes full of mischief. Louise. Gone 15 years now, but never absent. He gave a gentle nod. "Think we're gonna see him again, Louise?" His voice barely broke the stillness. He waited, as if listening for an answer only he could hear. The kettle sputtered once, then began to sing. He made his tea with 2 sugar cubes, stirred twice, sat down in the same vinyl chair by the same narrow table. The morning paper, already folded, already read, lay untouched. Instead, Franklin gazed out the window, watching the light dance across the gravel and dry grass. Today was his appointment. Again, 3 times rescheduled. First for renovations, then for system errors, then for staffing changes. But the pain had returned last night, that creeping tightness in his chest, as if someone were drawing a belt inside him, slow and unforgiving. It wasn't panic. It wasn't drama. It was quiet, patient pain, the kind that warned without shouting. He'd felt it before, in Da Nang, in the jungle, in the rain. He dressed carefully, beige slacks, a cream shirt with a collar that wouldn't quite lie flat. Over that, his brown jacket, light enough for spring, heavy enough for formality. Last, he reached for the soft green cap that hung by the door. It was worn, frayed near the back, but the emblem still stood. The eagle, globe, and anchor. The Marine Corps insignia, the one he'd earned. He ran a hand along the stitching before placing it on his head, his posture adjusting slightly with its weight. Outside, The bus stop was 4 blocks down. He walked slow, cane in one hand, a cloth bag in the other, not because he needed much, but because it felt right to carry something. As he walked, people passed. One jogger offered a quick nod. A woman walking her dog looked past him as if he were part of the sidewalk. A man in a pickup honked impatiently when Franklin stepped too close to the curb. The bus arrived 2 minutes late. The driver didn't wait for Franklin to reach the door. The engine revved, then hissed. As Franklin stepped up, he fumbled with his coins, a handful of dimes and nickels. The driver sighed. "Come on, sir. You got a card or not?" Franklin looked up, blinking. "No card, just this." He offered the change. The coins clattered into the tray. The driver said nothing more, just pulled away, jerking slightly as Franklin found his seat. The ride into town was uneventful. Dust shimmered on the windows. Teenagers argued 3 rows back. A mother wrestled with a squirming toddler across the aisle. Franklin stared out at the passing gas stations, strip malls, the wide sky. He got off 2 blocks from the clinic. The street was busy, midday traffic beginning to swell. He walked with steady steps toward the Veterans Medical Center. But when he entered, the woman at the front desk didn't smile. "We're full today," she said without looking up. Franklin stood for a beat, not sure she'd heard him right. "I have an appointment scheduled for 12:15, she sighed, tapping at her keyboard. "Dawes?" He nodded. "It's been shifted. We're referring walk-ins to county. They've got space." Franklin opened his mouth to protest, but the woman had already turned to the next person in line. So he left, 2 blocks to the hospital. His steps slower now. He rested twice at light poles, breathing shallow, pressing his free hand to his chest. The wind had picked up, sharp and dry. Outside the emergency room, he stood for a long moment before the glass doors parted. Cool air swept out like a sigh. Inside, he waited behind a woman with a stroller, then a teenager with a bandaged finger, then 2 more. When he finally reached the desk, the nurse, Rebecca Connors, didn't look up right away. "Name?" he told her. "Reason for visit?" He gestured to his chest. "It's tight. I've had this before. I think it might be..." She cut him off. "ID?" He handed over the old military card from his wallet. She glanced at it, typed something, then said flatly, "Not an emergency. Sit down and wait." Franklin tried again. "I don't think you understand. I said sit down. Now!" The words slammed into him harder than the pain. His legs wavered, his voice disappeared. Behind him, someone muttered, "Poor guy's just confused." He turned away. No one reached out. Not yet. He sat down, alone, as the monitor across the room beeped in rhythm with a life that had once outrun bullets, fire, and storm, and now sat quietly, waiting. The waiting room was a patchwork of urgency and indifference. Franklin Dawes sat hunched in a molded plastic chair, hands trembling slightly in his lap. His bag rested at his feet. The faint ticking of the wall clock became louder with each passing second, though no one seemed to hear it but him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The pain did not shout. It pressed, a steady ache beneath the ribs, reaching under the collarbone. It wasn't the first time. He'd felt it during the night, and again that morning. But now it clawed deeper, more insistent, a weight like cold iron being pressed to his sternum. Franklin leaned forward, sweat beginning to form near his temples. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked slightly. "I really can't." The nurse didn't even turn around. "Sir, I told you. Sit down. We'll call you when it's your turn." Her words lashed across the room like a slap. Her tone carried the tired cadence of someone used to saying it, again and again, louder each time. Franklin blinked. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded, though she never saw it. Nearby, a woman in her 30s cradled a screaming toddler on her hip. The nurse called her name next. "Room 4. Go on." The woman glanced back at Franklin for a split second, then moved on. A teenage boy with a bandaged ankle limped to the front. He was next. then someone with stomach cramps, then a man who had walked in 20 minutes after Franklin. Still, he waited. The monitor in the far corner blinked softly, showing blood pressure stats. A fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed, faltered, buzzed again. Franklin closed his eyes. His fingers twitched lightly in his lap. Not a tremor, but the body's quiet signal that something inside was beginning to give. A retired nurse sat 2 chairs over. Silver-haired, her name tag from a past life still clipped to her purse. She had been watching, carefully. She leaned over, voice soft and warm. "Would you like me to ask for you?" Franklin didn't speak right away. Then he gave the gentlest nod. She stood, approached the desk, clearing her throat with dignity. "Excuse me, that gentleman." The nurse cut her off without looking up. "He's been seen. It's not an emergency." The woman stared at her a moment, mouth slightly open, before returning to her seat beside Franklin. "I tried," she whispered. Franklin didn't blame her. He smiled faintly, as though to comfort her. More minutes passed. Outside, sirens rose and faded. Inside, the air felt thinner. The television mounted on the wall droned on about midday news. Earthquake in another state. Debate over healthcare reform. A dog rescued from a drainpipe. But in this room, a man was drowning in silence. Franklin shifted in his seat. A bead of sweat rolled past his ear. His chest ached deeper now, spreading along his shoulder. He stared down at his hands, the same hands that once dug trenches, carried rifles, lifted wounded men from jungle mud. Now they rested, useless, barely holding each other up. Across the lobby, the security guard made another slow round. Franklin tried to raise a hand, not waving, just lifting a few fingers. The guard paused, approached. "You all right there, sir?" Franklin nodded faintly, struggling to speak. "Chest, pain." The guard frowned. "I can't override triage, sir. Just relax." He moved on, muttering something about policy. Franklin stared at the floor tiles, off-white, worn in patches, like the soles of old boots. That was when the memory stirred. An echo, a flicker. The pain was familiar. Not just from age, but from a night long ago, when blood and rain had soaked into the same uniform that now sat folded in his closet. He remembered the mortar blasts, the fire, the breath of another man against his shoulder in the jungle dark. A sound behind him snapped him back. The automatic doors opened, a cold draft sweeping through. A group entered. 4 men, walking with quiet purpose. No fanfare, no formation. But something unmistakable in the set of their jaws, the squareness of their shoulders. They didn't speak. They simply looked. One of them paused. His eyes locked on Franklin, hunched in the chair, sweat beading at his brow, lips now slightly parted in labored breath. The man turned to his companions, nodded. They continued walking, for now. But something had shifted in the current of the room, like the air before a storm, when the clouds haven't yet cracked, but the silence begins to listen. Franklin gripped the edge of the seat. The pain wasn't leaving, and this time, no one else would either. It began without fanfare. A voice, steady, clear, rose above the television's drone and the rustle of clipboards. "Excuse me." The nurse at the desk looked up, surprised. A man stood before her, tall, broad-shouldered, not in uniform, but carrying it in every inch of his bearing. His hair was close-cropped, his eyes steady. His voice did not waver, but it didn't seek conflict either, just clarity. He gestured toward Franklin Dawes, still hunched over in his seat. "He's coming with us." The nurse blinked, confused. I'm sorry? You can't..." 2 more men appeared behind the first, then a 4th. They stood in a line, not aggressive, not raised to confront, but unshakable. The 4th one, a younger man with a Marine Corps tattoo, visible below the cuff of his sleeve, stepped beside the first. Another voice joined in, softer, but no less firm. "He wore the eagle, globe, and anchor. We don't wait while he suffers." The room didn't erupt. It stilled, like a breath held. The security guard stepped forward cautiously. "Gentlemen, I need to ask you to—" He didn't finish. The first Marine, his name, we would later learn, was Staff Sergeant James Halpern, looked directly at the guard, not with anger, not with challenge, just presence. A presence that said everything without needing a single word more. The receptionist's mouth opened, then closed. One of the younger Marines had already moved to Franklin's side. He didn't speak. He simply crouched, gently reaching for Franklin's elbow. "Sir," he whispered. "You all right?" Franklin tried to answer, but his breath caught. A second later, two of them lifted him gently, carefully, one hand behind his back, the other steadying his legs. No alarms went off, no shouting began. Just four men, moving with the discipline of those who once stormed hills under fire, now navigating bureaucracy with a different kind of resolve. The nurse fumbled for her radio. I have a situation at intake. Room 3, the charge nurse said behind her, stepping forward suddenly. Take him to room 3. The receptionist turned, startled. "But I said, room 3. She snapped the folder closed on her desk, eyes narrowing. Her tone held authority. Not anger, but the weight of someone who understood, who'd perhaps lost someone once, waiting too long in a room like this. Franklin was already halfway down the corridor, the four Marines at his side. The rest of the waiting room sat in stunned silence. No one applauded. No one took video, but every heart beat louder. Back in the hallway as they moved, Franklin's eyes fluttered open for a second. He looked toward the man closest to him, a corporal, maybe no older than his grandson had been. You didn't have to," the Marine smiled. "Yes, sir, we did." In the room, a nurse rushed in, alert now, rattled. Machines beeped to life. An oxygen line hissed softly. A blood pressure cuff wrapped around Franklin's arm. One of the Marines waited in the corner, still, watchful. Outside the door, the others stood guard. Not because anyone posed a threat, but because when one of theirs was in pain, they showed up. Not for medals, not for noise, just because that's who they were. That's who he had been. The hallway remained quiet. The fluorescent light above the door flickered once, then steadied. Rebecca Connors, the intake nurse, stood behind the desk. Her hands were shaking slightly. She didn't understand all of it yet. What had just shifted? What unspoken code had been honored? But she felt it. So did everyone else. As Franklin closed his eyes, an echo of memory presented itself. Vietnam, Da Nang Province, 1968. The jungle whispered in chaos. Rain slammed the canopy in torrents, washing mud down from the hillside in slow rivers of red and brown. Trees shivered with the percussion of mortar fire. Somewhere ahead, a flare hissed, illuminating the dark like lightning trapped in a bottle. Corporal Franklin Dawes dropped low beside a narrow trail, boots half submerged in sucking clay. He could barely hear the orders coming through the crackling radio. The signal was cut, drowned by rain and fear. A cry rang out. Not distant, close. Franklin turned. Someone was down. A young private, barely out of high school. Blood smeared across his trousers, thick and wet where shrapnel had torn into his legs. Franklin didn't hesitate. He moved, fast, mechanical, every motion forged by drills, sweat, and instinct. He tossed his rifle to his back, slid down beside the boy. "Name?" he shouted through the rain. The private could barely lift his head. "Mendoza," he gasped. "Eli." Franklin grabbed him under the arms. The kid screamed. It was like lifting fire, but Franklin didn't stop. Mortars howled again. A blast nearby tore through a bamboo grove. Leaves spun down like confetti from hell. "Hang on, Eli. Stay with me." The two disappeared into the tree line as bullets cracked the air behind them. Franklin dragged him behind a fallen tree, heart hammering. Blood soaked through his sleeves. His breath came in gasps, lungs heaving like bellows. Eli's eyes fluttered open. You didn't leave me?" Franklin stared at him. For a moment, the world went silent. Rain still fell, Shells still burst, but none of it mattered. He answered with the only truth that ever mattered. "Not how we do things, son." He stayed there with him, until the medics arrived, until the evacuation bird circled and came down in the clearing, rotor blades flattening the trees like grass under boots. He rode with the kid all the way to the aid station, wouldn't let go. The corpsman said the bleeding had nearly taken him. Another 15 minutes, maybe 10. Franklin never forgot his name, Eli Mendoza. He wrote his mother a letter, twice. The first when Eli lived, the second years later when he didn't. After the war, Franklin kept the letters and the photo. Eli in uniform, smiling, barely shaving age. There were days when the world felt so far from that jungle, and yet, other times, the boy's voice would echo through time, through hospital walls, through waiting rooms that turned cold and sterile. And in those moments, Franklin remembered what it meant, the weight of not being left behind, and what it meant to never leave someone again. Room 3 was small, whitewashed walls, fluorescent lights humming like an old refrigerator. The paper on the exam table crinkled beneath Franklin's slumped body as the young doctor listened closely to his chest. The nurse checked vitals with hurried fingers. A blood pressure cuff hissed, then went silent. Outside that door, the 4 Marines stood like anchors. They didn't speak. They didn't pace. They stood, one beside the other, each in their dress casuals. A quiet line of resolve. Rebecca Connors watched from the station. The tension in her face had collapsed, replaced now with a brittle unease. She tapped her pen, looked for someone to blame, but found only silence and stares. The waiting room, once buzzing, had gone quiet. A woman with 2 children leaned forward, whispering, "Is that man a veteran?" An elderly man nodded. He wore the patch. Rebecca turned away. In the hallway, the Marines didn't move. Not when the security guard passed. Not when the administrator appeared, reading the scene and choosing, wisely, to say nothing. Minutes passed. Inside the room, Franklin blinked slowly. His breathing was steadier now. The doctor had already diagnosed the symptoms. Unstable angina. One more delay, and the consequences could have been irreversible. He turned his head slightly toward the door. He felt them there. Not just their footsteps, their presence. One step beyond duty, deeper than camaraderie. It was brotherhood, living and breathing beyond wars and years. The door creaked open. A nurse peeked in, hesitated, then stepped aside. A single Marine entered. Not the tallest, not the youngest, but the one with eyes that had seen too much and still chose kindness. He stepped quietly to Franklin's side. He didn't salute. He didn't say his rank. He didn't say much at all. He placed a hand gently on Franklin's forearm. We stayed. Franklin's lips parted, his voice hoarse. "You came." The Marine gave a small nod. "The moment we saw you, there was no choice." Franklin turned his hand upward, a gesture, not quite a grasp, not quite a reach. It met the Marine's palm halfway. A silent agreement. Outside, a boy in a baseball cap tapped his mother's leg. She looked, then stood. Others followed. The receptionist looked up as chairs emptied one by one. A soft line formed just outside room 3. Not a crowd, not a protest, just faces. Some familiar, some not. Veterans. Grandchildren, neighbors, witnesses. One woman, the retired nurse from earlier, whispered to Rebecca as she passed, "That's what honor looks like." Inside, the Marines remained. When Franklin closed his eyes, it wasn't in weariness, but in peace. The machines beeped steadily. The room was warm now, not from temperature, from something else. Respect. And from the hallway, a voice, barely audible, whispered, "They didn't leave me." And the world was still. It began with a photograph, taken on a phone held low, quiet, almost accidental, but it captured everything. 4 Marines in silent formation outside room 3, the faded red patch on Franklin's cap barely visible through the doorway. and the stillness that had blanketed the entire emergency room. That image was posted by a young medical student just beginning her first rotation. She titled it simply, "They didn't say a word, but everyone heard them." Within hours, it spread. A tweet, then a thread. By dawn, it was on veteran message boards. By mid-morning, a local news station shared it, followed by a nationwide morning show. The headline varied, but the story remained the same. An old soldier, quietly dismissed, and the 4 Marines who said no, without saying much at all. Rebecca Connors, the intake nurse, watched the news coverage from her small break room monitor. She looked smaller now, paler. She didn't speak to co-workers. She didn't contest the investigation that followed. The hospital issued a statement. At first, it was clinical, standard lines of apology and procedural re-evaluation. But after the public response, something shifted. The hospital board convened. Within the week, a new protocol was implemented. Veteran priority review, an immediate triage reassessment for any patient who presents with prior military service. Supervisory review within 3 minutes of arrival. Not a courtesy, a commitment. Outside the hospital, a laminated plaque was installed beside the sliding entrance doors. It read, "In honor of those who served and were not forgotten." Franklin never asked for that. He never even saw it. Not right away. He was discharged 2 days after the incident. Stable, medicated, breathing lighter than he had in years. The doctor, a young man in his 30s, offered a firm handshake and a quiet, "I'm sorry for the wait." Franklin simply nodded. The Marines, they didn't wait for thanks either. They visited that afternoon. Brought a thermos of coffee, strong and black. No ceremony, just conversation. They left their contact info. One of them joked, "You ever get in trouble again, sir? We're only 1 call away." Franklin had smiled, tired but whole. He spent the next week answering letters, veterans groups, a high school civics class, a small newspaper in Maine that had tracked him down to run his story alongside an editorial about forgotten heroes. And then one morning, an envelope arrived, gold-stamped, official, an invitation. "You are cordially invited to speak at the California Veterans Healthcare Symposium." Below it, a note handwritten by the symposium's director. "You reminded us what matters. Thank you for being louder than silence." Franklin held the letter in both hands, and after a moment, he walked to his bedroom, took down his service photo from the wall, not to replace it, but to add this letter beside it. 2 frames, 1 life. Following the viral incident and the hospital's swift internal review, Rebecca Connors was quietly removed from the emergency room intake rotation. No press release, no televised apology, just an empty chair behind the front desk the next day. Administrators labeled it a personnel reassignment based on operational needs. She now works at an off-site records department, far from the front lines of human suffering. But something changed in her. Weeks later, a junior nurse spotted her sitting alone in the staff lounge, a printout in her lap, the now famous image of the 4 Marines standing behind Franklin. She didn't speak, but she folded the page with care, slipped it into her bag. No one knows if she meant to keep it, but she did, elsewhere. The sky above Riverside National Cemetery was washed in late afternoon gold. A hush laid over its gentle hills like a folded blanket. Flags hung motionless in the windless air. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath Franklin Dawes's careful steps. He walked alone. No escort, no cameras, no speech to give this time. Just a folded note in his jacket pocket and a stone in his hand. The path led past rows and rows of white markers, some fresh, their soil still dark, some worn by decades of rain and sun. He stopped at one, bent slowly, knees trembling slightly from the strain. The headstone read, "Private Elias Mendoza, United States Marine Corps, 1948-1968. Franklin placed the stone gently at the base, resting it against the edge where grass met marble. He stood in silence. The breeze returned then, faint but steady. enough to rustle the collar of his jacket and stir the tired branches of the trees behind him. "You didn't know I'd come back here, did you?" he said softly. He reached into his coat and took out the letter from the symposium, now folded in quarters. He didn't read it aloud, just placed it beside the stone. Not for show, for him. "I didn't leave you," he whispered, "and they didn't leave me." For a moment, he didn't move. And then he smiled, small, almost weightless. Franklin adjusted his cap, the one with the faded red emblem, the eagle, globe, and anchor, still sewn above the brim, frayed but proud. He took one final look down the hill, the shadows long now, then turned, began his walk back to the car. He did not walk fast, but each step was firm. Each step was steady. Each step was earned. The last frame lingered, Franklin's silhouette against the sun, marine cap outlined by light, shoulders set, the sound of his footsteps fading, but never vanishing. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.